Russian President Vladimir Putin just suffered a serious strategic defeat. He's just been forced to watch as Ukraine declares victory in Pokrovsk, signaling that Putin's plans to take the city lie in tatters. The Russian force has collapsed, and Ukraine has just defended a key piece of territory that makes it much harder for Russia to push forward into Donetsk. Don't underestimate how important this victory is for Ukraine. At a time when the tide of the Ukraine war is shifting away from Russia, the defense of Pokrovsk is a massive symbolic blow to Putin's campaign. On April 30, Newsweek was the first outlet to report on this massive Ukrainian win. It says that Russia made Pokrovsk a significant target several months ago. But Putin's strategy was strange. Rather than assaulting the settlement directly, as he's done so many times in the past, he commanded his forces to skirt around the south of the city. The Russian goal seemed to be to bypass Pokrovsk initially, allowing Putin to position his forces near the border of the neighboring town of Dnipropetrovsk. From there, Russia could push deeper into Donetsk, while also having the option to double back on itself and potentially attack Pokrovsk from two sides. The plan failed. That's according to the Ukrainian Center for Security and Cooperation, which says, "We're seeing a coordinated Russian information campaign tied to their failure, the fact that they've lost the battle for Pokrovsk." That statement was backed by a demonstration of how Russia has made minor advances around the Pokrovsk settlement, but has ultimately failed to take the city. To go along with that failure, Ukraine says that Russia has been losing far more troops in Pokrovsk than Ukraine, leading to a casualty count bound to make Putin's blood boil. That's according to the Commander-in-Chief of Ukraine's armed forces, Oleksandr Syrskyi, who said in January that Putin had concentrated some of Russia's best units for an offensive against Pokrovsk. "The enemy is making every effort to take Pokrovsk, and we're doing everything to prevent its capture," Syrskyi said at the time. "The enemy is concentrating its best units there, the best units. He has the ability to change them, because he has a greater potential for offensive actions." The he in this situation was Putin. As it turns out, Putin's potential isn't reflected in reality. Even in January, Syrskyi claimed that Russia's casualties were many times higher than Ukraine's around Pokrovsk. Those losses have proven telling. Fast forward a little over 4 months, and Ukraine still holds the settlement while Putin's plans for Donetsk are stalling out. More information comes from the head of the Ukrainian Center for Security and Cooperation, Syrskyi. He claims that Ukraine has properly executed a defensive strategy for Pokrovsk that achieved several objectives. One relates to timelines. Putin had a plan to take several settlements in Donetsk by the beginning of summer to prepare for a much stronger offensive in the region. Now those plans lie in tatters. "We disrupted their plans," Kuzan claims, "and now they're falling behind their own schedules that are critical for their summer offensive campaign." Don't underestimate the importance of these delays. As Kuzan highlights, Putin's plans being pushed back means that Russia no longer has the ability to push Ukraine out of the Donetsk oblast. Russia has intended to use Pokrovsk as a staging ground for future attacks. Now he's dealing with several new issues, including being forced to decide whether to commit and lose more soldiers in Pokrovsk, and the problem that comes with allowing a key logistical hub to remain in Ukraine's hands. More about that logistical issue soon. Now, before the victory announcement, there were plenty of signs that Putin's Pokrovsk offensive wasn't going the way that he intended. Take what happened on April 17 as an example. On that date, Ukraine's 14th Chernovo-Kalania Brigade, which is part of the country's National Guard, managed to obliterate a Russian offensive near Pokrovsk. By the end of the attack, around 200 Russian soldiers lay dead on the outskirts of Pokrovsk, with another 30 being injured. Ukraine also managed to destroy a staggering 115 units of Russian military equipment in this single defense, likely meaning it took out several tanks, artillery units, and drones. The Russian assault included 2 companies of soldiers riding motorcycles and armored vehicles. As Ukrainian National Guard commander, Oleksandr Pivnenko put it at the time, "The battle is yet another proof of the coordinated and professional actions of our defenders who are holding the front line." The impressive defense was just one example of the 48 attacks Ukraine fended off around Pokrovsk on April 17 alone, says the Kyiv Independent. Each failed attack was like a dagger shoved into Putin's side. Every time Ukraine killed more of his soldiers and destroyed Russian equipment, Putin knew that his follow-up offensives would be weaker. If April 17 represented the strongest attack Putin focused on Pokrovsk, the assaults that came later weren't able to match that day's ferocity. Eventually, Ukraine's defensive efforts wore Russia's forces in Pokrovsk down. Now, around half a month later, Ukraine is still in Pokrovsk and Putin is scrambling to come up with a new plan for Donetsk. Ukraine's defense of Pokrovsk stands as one of the country's most noteworthy victories in 2025. Here's why it matters so much. Pokrovsk is believed to be one of the most strategically significant cities in Ukraine, especially in Donetsk, because of the role it plays as a key supply hub for Ukraine's forces in the east of the country. Initially, the settlement doesn't seem all that important. Before Putin's invasion, it was home to around 69,000 residents, many of whom were employed in its coal mining and metallurgy industries. Both represent another reason why Putin wants Pokrovsk, which will be explained soon. When Putin's forces invaded Ukraine, thousands fled Pokrovsk. Ukraine also gave the order for families that have children to leave, eventually leaving Pokrovsk a shadow of its former self. By the time Putin launched his full-scale offensive, only 17,000 of the city's original 69,000 people still lived there. Much of the infrastructure in the city had already been destroyed by shelling. Russia thought it would be an easy target for its winter and spring attacks in 2025. It wasn't. Pokrovsk is far too important to Ukraine for it to allow the city to fall into Russia's hands. The city stands at an intersection of several highways, all of which Ukraine uses to ferry troops and supplies in and out of both Donetsk and the wider Donbass region. One of those highways leads directly towards several other major cities in Donetsk, including Chasiv Yar, which has been another of Putin's main focuses in 2025. Add to that a railway station, which was already regionally significant and has since become another key supply line for Ukraine, and losing Pokrovsk simply isn't an option for Ukraine. If the city falls, Ukraine's ability to stay in Donetsk falls with it. Defense expert Mikhailo Zhirokov says as much when speaking to the BBC. Pokrovsk is a very important hub, a center of defense. If we lose Pokrovsk, the entire front line will crumble, he claimed in August 2024. He's not wrong. Russia claiming Pokrovsk allows it to not only cut off key Ukrainian logistics, which leaves other towns in Donetsk exposed, but also allows Putin's forces to use those supply lines for themselves. Russia would grow stronger in East Ukraine as Ukraine troops are isolated and become weaker. Donetsk would fall, and with it would come a greater potential for Russia to push deeper into Ukraine and closer to Kyiv. Beyond these strategic issues, Pokrovsk is also important from a symbolic perspective. Its capture would represent the largest that Russia has been able to pull off since 2023, when Putin's forces took Bakhmut. On one hand, that singular fact shows how poorly Russia's forces have been doing in Ukraine. Pokrovsk isn't a major city in terms of its sheer size. It's one of the smaller cities in Ukraine. The fact that its capture would be such a monumental victory for Russia in the context of the last 2 years of the Ukraine war highlights just how well Ukraine has been defending its major cities. A small victory, in terms of the city's size and population, becomes massive to Russia. And there are plenty of other reasons why Pokrovsk is so important. The city's coal and metal industries were noted earlier. Both are things that Putin really wants to exploit. The BBC says that Pokrovsk houses the largest single producer of coking coal in all of Ukraine. Also known as metallurgical coal, this type of coal is naturally occurring and is both higher in carbon and lower in moisture than standard coal. Those features matter because they make coking coal vital in the steel making process. According to BHP, it takes around 1,697 pounds of coking coal to make a single ton of steel. Russia could use this type of coal to massively ramp up its steel production, enabling it to build more tanks, armored vehicles, and other weapons it could then use to batter Ukraine. And it's not like Russia has many alternatives. Around 70% of the world's steel is produced in basic oxygen blast furnaces that use coking coal. with the coal itself being a finite resource. Run out of coking coal and you can't make more steel. Putin knows this, meaning Pokrovsk is a major target for what it can provide to Russia, along with what it takes away from Ukraine. Taking Pokrovsk would also allow Putin to hammer one more nail into the coffin of Ukraine's metal exporting industry. Before Russia's invasion, metals were among Ukraine's primary exports, alongside agricultural products. Those metals included the steel Ukraine could make thanks to its access to Pokrovsk coking coal, along with rare earth metals located in the wider Donetsk region. In 2021, this combination of metals amounted to 23% of the total goods exports Ukraine sold to the rest of the world. By August 2024, Ukraine's metal exports had shrunk to a quarter of their 2021 levels, taking a significant bite out of the country's economy in the process. If Putin controls Pokrovsk, he also controls the metals the city produces. That's great for Russia's economy. It could also spell major trouble for Ukraine's finances as it tries to bolster its defense against Putin's invasion. Ironically, Pokrovsk heavy industrialization, which Putin covets so much, may also be one of the reasons why Russia has failed to take the city. As one Ukrainian soldier told the BBC, they'll have a huge challenge to get this area because it's a very industrialized area with pretty significant defense lines. In other words, Ukraine has been able to use the many coal-producing and metallurgical facilities in Pokrovsk to create fortifications that Putin's forces simply can't break through. Granted, the repurposing of industrial facilities makes them targets for Russian bombs, missiles, and shells. But buildings can be rebuilt. It's far harder to retake a city, especially when your opponent can use that city's key features to defend against you. So, Pokrovsk is important to Ukraine both as a logistics hub and because of its symbolic and industrial significance. But there's another reason Ukraine's defense of the city is so important: its location. Pokrovsk is situated about 35 miles northwest of Donetsk city, near the administrative border of Donetsk oblast. That border is massive in the Ukraine war. Putin has been attempting to reach and control it since 2014, when he first launched his campaign of aggression against Ukraine. Back then, Putin relied on Russian separatist forces inside Donetsk to get the job done. Those forces failed. In his current invasion, Putin is sacrificing thousands of his troops to get to that line because he knows success would bring him complete control over Donetsk. That control would be massive for Putin. It would reinforce the claims he's made about Donetsk ever since 2014. That year, pro-Russian separatists in Donetsk and the neighboring Donbas region of Luhansk declared independence from Ukraine. But Russia didn't officially recognize those declarations until February 2022. By seizing full control of Donetsk now, Putin is trying to turn those long-standing claims into reality. Nothing has changed. If Pokrovsk would represent a symbolic victory for Russia in terms of its size, the city allowing Russia to push deeper into Donetsk would represent a victory for Putin's opinion that the oblast was always Russian to begin with. That's another victory that Ukraine can't allow. Any validation of Putin's beliefs, even if that validation comes from Russian military force, weakens Ukraine morale while prompting Putin to push even harder to take other regions of Ukraine. Claiming more of the Donbas would represent a victory for Putin that Russia's leader sorely needs. That's according to Michael McFaul, who is the former US ambassador to Russia. Putin has given up on his more ambitious goals completely, McFaul said way back in April 2022. McFaul added that it was very striking how they, meaning Russia, have changed the name of their war to Special Military Operation in Defense of Donbass. In other words, Putin has already reframed his failed invasion into a fight to supposedly reclaim regions of Ukraine he believes should belong to Russia. Ukraine's defense of Pokrovsk means Putin is further away from this secondary form of victory than he wants to be, which weakens Putin's position at home and demonstrates to Russia's leader that Donetsk isn't as willing to roll over and accept his leadership as he thought. There's also a wider economic factor to consider. The coking mine in Pokrovsk came up earlier. The Kyiv Independent says that the mine was worth about $1.8 billion to Ukraine before Putin launched his invasion. Expand that industrialist scope to all of Donetsk, and it becomes even clearer why Putin wants the region so badly. It's a figurative gold mine. The 20% of Ukraine that Russia currently occupies, which includes about half of Donetsk and over 90% of Luhansk, represents about 40% of Ukraine's natural metal resources. These metals run the gamut from deposits of critical minerals such as titanium and graphite to rare earth metals that include neodymium and lanthanum. Ukraine is also home to an estimated 500,000 tons of untapped lithium reserves, some of which are in Donetsk. In short, there are billions of dollars worth of metals and coal lying underneath the ground in Donetsk. Pokrovsk offers a microcosm of the economic benefits that come from tapping into those resources. By defending the city, Ukraine stops Putin from taking a step closer to full control over Donetsk. As long as Donetsk isn't fully in Russian hands, the resources that lie within its borders can't be exploited by Putin. They stay somewhat safe while Ukraine is fighting for them, meaning Ukraine still has a chance to benefit from everything those minerals deliver economically in the future. Then there's the military issue that Ukraine's defense of Pokrovsk poses to Putin. By keeping one of its most important logistical hubs open, Ukraine has created the possibility for counterattacks in the Donbass that may eat away at the territorial gains Russia made in 2024. Evidence of this possibility has already emerged throughout 2025. In February, Ukraine's brave defense of Pokrovsk allowed it to launch several counteroffensives in villages surrounding the city that further slowed Russia's advance. These counteroffensives included pushing Russia out of a village named Donetsk, which is just south of Pokrovsk. Ukraine also reclaimed the territories of Pischyny and Vodiandra in the same month. Moving into March, Ukraine's ability to maintain Pokrovsk allowed it to launch more counteroffensives, including one focusing on the key territory of Donetsk. All of these counters came as the intensity of Russia's attacks diminished, with each failed attempt to capture Pokrovsk and the territory surrounding it. All of this amounts to bad news for Russia. With Pokrovsk finally secured, Ukraine can focus more intently on these types of counterattacks. It also knows that it has Russia's forces on the ropes. The minor territorial regains Ukraine made in February and March may evolve into much stronger and more concerted campaigns to retake other major settlements in Donetsk. And without taking Pokrovsk, Putin will be able to do nothing to stop Ukraine from reinforcing and resupplying its troops in Donetsk in support of these counters. That means he has to come up with other plans, as he's left asking himself a question: what comes next for Russia? A ceasefire may be on the agenda. After losing the fight for Pokrovsk, Putin has started banding around the idea of a 3-day ceasefire to take place between May 8 and May 11. Russia's leader claims that a ceasefire will be in place to allow his country to peacefully commemorate its victory against the Axis powers in World War II. The reality is that Putin knows that his forces are struggling in Donetsk, with Pokrovsk representing the latest of several shots to the Russian gut. Putin wants to stop fighting for a few days so he can regroup and prepare for a larger push against Pokrovsk in the future. Ukraine can't allow that to happen, and if Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is smart, then Ukraine won't even entertain the idea of a 3-day ceasefire in May. After all, Putin proposed something similar for Easter, only to almost immediately go back on his word. The odds are he'd do the same in May. Even if he doesn't, giving Russia time to regroup in Donetsk puts Pokrovsk at risk at a time when Ukraine is celebrating the key victory of defending the city. Given the almost guaranteed failure of the proposed May ceasefire, Putin seems to be scrambling for other options. And he may have found one: direct talks with Ukraine. Or at least claims that it's willing to enter such talks. On April 29, Russia's foreign ministry, Sergei Lavrov, hinted that Putin's May proposals signals the start of direct talks with Ukraine. Our proposal, which President Putin voiced, is the start of direct negotiations without preconditions, Lavrov said. In this situation, a ceasefire is seen as a precondition. Lavrov is referring to past proposals for a 30-day ceasefire, all of which have fallen by the wayside. With its proposal of a 3-day ceasefire in May, Russia may be trying to retake control of a situation that is rapidly spinning out of its grasp. Putin knows he just lost a key battle in Donetsk. Even as Russia rebuilds its forces for a summer offensive, he also knows that loss sets Russia up for continued failure in a region Russia desperately wants. Now he's trying to switch tack by claiming he's open to direct talks and is extending something of an olive branch to Ukraine. Zelensky and his team have yet to comment on these Russian claims that it's opening a dialogue with the May ceasefire. Putin could be playing a trick. He could also be showcasing how desperate he's become, especially recalling McFaul's comments about how claiming Donetsk would be a victory condition for Russia after Putin's initial invasion failed. Now that Putin realizes that Pokrovsk is off the table, he may push for negotiations that allow his forces to claim the regions of Donetsk that Russia currently occupies. Ukraine shouldn't accept. It's on the front foot in the region and is primed to push its advantage. In the coming months, look for Ukraine to use its Pokrovsk victory as a launching pad for renewed pushes into territory lost to Russia. This may just be the start of Ukraine's fight back. But what do you think about Ukraine's defense of Pokrovsk? How much of a massive win is it for Ukraine, along with being a huge defeat for Russia? How will Putin respond? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and remember to subscribe to The Military Show for more commentary on the latest developments in the Ukraine war. We're an independent source of up-to-date news and information about military conflicts around the globe, and greatly appreciate your support.